You've probably heard this one, right? That you get your brains from your mother? It's an idea that's out there everywhere. But is there any real science behind it? Well, today, we're going to unpack that exact question. We're diving into the fascinating and pretty complex world of inherited intelligence to see if mom really does get all the credit.
It all really kicks off with headlines just like this one. I mean, that is a bold statement, isn't it? The claim is basically that when it comes to smarts, your mother's genes are the ones that count, and your father's, well, they don't really factor in. This idea completely captured the public's imagination and, you can bet, started a lot of debates.
So what's the deal? Is this a hard scientific fact, or is it more of a popular fiction? That's the big question we're setting out to answer. We're going to follow the evidence, from the genes themselves all the way to the environment that shapes us, to find out what's really going on.
Okay, so let's start by looking at the core argument for T-Mom. The whole theory really begins with something you might remember from high school biology class, our sex chromosomes.
So the basic theory goes like this. A lot of the key genes for intelligence are located on the X chromosome. Now, since women have two X chromosomes, they have, a double chance of passing on those intelligence traits. Men, on the other hand, only have one X, so they have fewer shots at it. Seems pretty straightforward on the surface, but believe me, the science gets way more specific.
And that leads us to this much more complex idea, something called conditioned genes. And this right here is where the theory gets really, really interesting.
Okay, so conditioned genes are kind of like genes with a return address stamped on them. They have this special biochemical tag that tells your body, hey, I came from mom or I came from dad. Think of it like a light switch that can only be turned on if it comes from one specific parent. And the theory claims that for a lot of our advanced cognitive functions, those genetic switches will only flip on if they're inherited from the mother.
So where did this whole idea even come from? Well, the first clues actually popped up from some really clever and kind of wild lab studies on mice, where scientists could actually tweak their genetic material to see what happened.
And the results were, wow, they were dramatic. Mice that were given an extra dose of their mother's genes, they developed bigger brains and smaller bodies. These maternal genes seem to be the architects for the thinking parts of the brain, like the cerebral cortex, the home of reasoning and planning. But the mice with extra paternal genes had the opposite, smaller brains, bigger bodies. And those genes were concentrated in the limbic system, the part of the brain that handles more primal stuff like sex, food, and aggression.
Of course, we're not mice. But then, a huge study in Glasgow seemed to back this up in humans. Researchers tracked more than 12,000 young people for years, and after they factored in all sorts of things like education, social status, you name it, they found that the single best predictor of a person's intelligence was, consistently, the IQ of their mother.
So, case closed, right? It's all from mom. Well, not so fast. Like with most things in science, the real story is just so much more complex. And the plot? It's about to thicken a lot.
This is that moment where we really need to just pause and ask a critical question. Is the science really settled on this? Could it possibly be that simple?
And the answer, according to more recent and broader analysis, is a pretty firm no. As this source makes really clear, there just isn't conclusive evidence to support that all-from-mom claim. The reality is that inheriting intelligence is incredibly complex, and that earlier theory just doesn't capture the whole picture.
And here is a huge reason why that theory is just too simple. We're not talking about a few genes on one chromosome. Oh no, scientists have now found over 538 genes that are linked to intelligence, and they're scattered all across our DNA, inherited from both of our parents. So this isn't a single light switch, it's more like a massive interconnected power grid.
And that brings us to the real recipe for intelligence. See, it's not just about the genetic ingredients you're given from your parents. It's about how those ingredients get mixed and baked. How they interact with the world around you.
When you really dig into the data, a much clearer picture emerges. Study after study estimates that genetics, heredity, only account for about half of our intelligence. The other half, a massive chunk, comes down to our environment, our upbringing, our education, basically nurture. It is a true 50-50 partnership.
So if our genes are only providing the blueprint, then what's building the rest of the house? Let's go explore that other, absolutely crucial 50%.
So we're moving beyond the DNA code now and into the critical role of nurture. This is where that parent-child relationship takes center stage, and it turns out it can literally, physically shape the brain. Tons of studies have shown that a secure, emotional bond with a parent,
It isn't just a nice-to-have for a happy childhood. Nope. It is fundamentally important for cognitive development. That bond literally builds the brain. A huge study from the University of Washington really drove this point home. It found that kids who had a strong, emotionally supported bond with their mothers actually had a hippocampus. That's a part of the brain that's vital for memory and learning that was 10% larger than kids without that same secure attachment. That bond provides the safety and confidence a child needs to go out and explore the world, to solve problems, which is the very foundation of intelligence.
But, and this is so important to understand, this nurturing role isn't just exclusive to mothers. Not at all. Fathers play an equally critical part in this whole developmental story.
Fathers can and absolutely do provide that same powerful, brain-building nurturing. And let's not forget the genetic side. Fathers contribute hundreds of their own genes that influence everything from personality to emotional intelligence. And those traits are absolutely essential for unlocking a child's full cognitive potential.
So, what's the verdict? We started with this simple, catchy idea that intelligence is a gift from mom. But the real science reveals this much more beautiful and complex partnership. Yeah, there are some intelligence-related genes on the X chromosome, but they're just a few pieces in a giant puzzle of over 500 genes from both parents. And even then, that genetic blueprint, it's only half the story. The other half is all about nurture, that secure, loving bond that gives a child the confidence to learn, to explore, and to truly reach their full potential.
And that kind of leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? Maybe we've been asking the wrong question this whole time. Instead of just focusing on where intelligence comes from, perhaps the more important question for all of us, for parents, for educators, for society, is how can we best create the environment to nurture it in everyone? Thanks for joining me.